Well, first of all, before we talk about anything, the iOS 13 public beta software just dropped, both for iPadOS, macOS, watchOS. Be careful putting all of these public betas on your main devices, as so many of you probably are, whether you were pirating the developers or didn't want to pay for the developer beta and decided to wait. Respect to those of you who are patient. Hope you enjoy all the new features that are brought to this year's versions of all kinds of Apple operating systems out there that we've already talked about on this channel. If you want to see what kind of noticeable and my favorite upgrades, those videos were uploaded a couple weeks back, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're talking about some recent reports we got on the 16-inch MacBook Pro and why it turns out that may actually be coming at the end of the year. Let's begin. So today's report comes from Jeff Lin, who is an analyst at research from IHS Markit. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I'm sorry if I'm messing something up there. I usually am, but he's giving us some specific display resolutions that Apple's going to be implementing into the Mac line later this year. And if you want any kind of backup with this particular source, they were able to predict the 10.5-inch iPad Pro 4 months before it dropped, which apparently at the time no one else had even predicted. No one had the idea that Apple may be releasing a 10.5-inch iPad, but they were the ones who were able to come forward with that because, of course, they have insights on the market. They know what different company display resolutions are being ordered, so they're well aware of what Apple's ordering for this year's MacBook Pro, which we now have the exact screen resolution for. It's 3070 by 1920. That's right. Left to right on this display, we're finally getting a MacBook with over 3,000 pixels across. And if you compare that to the 15-inch MacBook Pro right now, which has a resolution of 2880 by 1800, you'll notice the screen resolution is improving not just up and down. So if you were wondering if, okay, bezels could be shrinking on this generation MacBook Pro, but it's just going to be on the forehead at the top, this encourages the idea that either A, the pixel density could be a little bit more improved with this slightly larger display. It's not like it's hugely different from the 15-inch. We're only going up 1 inch, but given Apple likes to keep things small and keep things relatively portable, most people are guessing that this 16-inch MacBook Pro is still going to have the same footprint of the 15-inch MacBook Pro we already have, just with those slimmer bezels. But if they decide to keep the pixel per inch the same, which Apple typically does with laptops at this size, that means that it is shrinking the bezels not just on the top of the MacBook Pro, but also on the side. So overall, given this is not a display you're going to be holding in the hand, it sounds like Apple is taking that into consideration, meaning they can go really, really slim on the bezels, perhaps even slimmer than the iPad Pro bezels, because they know you don't need space for your thumbs to rest while using this monitor. It's going to be sitting on your lap or on your desk, and this display is purely just going to be for looking at, not a touch interface. And they also detailed that this would be an LCD display. We talked about earlier, there were some reports that Apple's in talks with Samsung about using OLED displays on future generation iPads and MacBooks, but it sounds like that's not what's going to be happening this year. And they also detail in the report that they have a production target of launching the 16-inch MacBook Pro in September, which I know is ticking off a ton of you guys right now because you either just bought the MacBook Pro that Apple launched in May, and you're like, why are they refreshing it so incredibly soon? Well, Benjamin from 9to5Mac has some theories about that, as he also reported on this, and he is also a very credible analyst and is very good at covering things that are very likely to end up happening. He's suggesting that perhaps this is not a 15-inch MacBook Pro replacement, meaning the MacBook Pros that got refreshed back in May with the new spec bumps, some of them getting as fast as the baseline iMac Pro before they get thermal throttled, of course, which, by the way, as far as I've seen, I haven't read any reports that the 2019 MacBook Pros have had any keyboard failures yet. I'm not saying that they need to just stick with the butterfly keyboard again, but I'm glad that as far as we know, Apple may have fixed the butterfly keyboard failure rate. Some people probably just hate it anyway because it's thin and they don't like the travel, but still, I'm glad that they could have potentially fixed it so far. And I know that it's on the repair policy list, but I think they mostly did that for ease of mind, just so that they're saying no matter what happens to this keyboard, if anything goes wrong with it, we'll definitely fix it for free. And that's likely going to be the case with this 16-inch MacBook Pro. There's no rumors, there's no leaks to suggest that Apple is drastically redesigning the keyboard or going back to the old traditional scissor mechanism for this generation of MacBook Pro. So sorry, don't get your hopes up there. I hate to bum you guys out, but if you didn't like the butterfly keyboard, this new generation probably won't have anything different either. But anyway, Benjamin from 9to5Mac is saying that this could also be a new standalone tier aside from the MacBook Pros that we already have. The ones we got refreshed back in May will continue to be sold probably for the same price that they are now, but Apple will now have a even more more powerful and even more futuristic looking MacBook in the lineup that sits above the already kind of expensive 15-inch MacBook Pros. This thing is likely going to have a very, very fast CPU, top of the line specs in a laptop. Who knows, given this is a redesign, it might even have some extra I/O. They might slap an extra Thunderbolt 3 port on there. Maybe they'll ship it with 6 Thunderbolt 3 ports, but of course you can imagine they'll be charging top dollar for that. Knowing that the bezels are going to be thinner and that the resolution is going to be higher is very encouraging, though. I find it kind of upsetting right now that if you want to buy a Apple-made Mac display with slim bezels, you know, with a design that's not from 2012, then you have to buy the $6,000 Trypophobia machine. Like, they need to work on slimming down the bezels, not just for the extreme pro display users who are spending $6 grand on their monitor, but also for everyone else who's just buying laptops or iMacs. And I find it quite bizarre in this report that they think the new MacBook Pros are coming out in September, which, by the way, he did also mention they'd be refreshing potentially the 13-inch MacBook Pro at the same time, and also giving a spec bump to the MacBook Air, which would be expected after about a year of being available. Those two, of course, would be spec bumps, so the 13-inch MacBook Air, that's not getting a redesign. Neither is the 13-inch MacBook Pro. The design is going to stay the same for those two, but Apple's basically giving us a little sneak peek of the future of MacBooks, potentially in September. But I noticed that Apple almost never reveals Macintoshes at the same time as iPhones and Apple Watches, so I'd find it kind of bizarre if they launched the new redesigned MacBook Pro at the same time as the new iPhones. Like, typically, if they want to have a Mac event, they'll do it in October, in the November time period, somewhere a little bit after the iPhone event. But, you know, the next generation iPhone isn't going to be terribly exciting. There's not going to be much to talk about. Triple camera, everyone! We did it! All right, okay, bye. And neither is the Apple Watch Series 5. There's not gonna be much to talk about. So maybe Apple's gonna do something a little bit differently this year and not have an event for October, November, December, and instead just kind of knock out all the rest of their hardware at the September event. So if that ends up being true, this is going to be a very stock-filled event. It's gonna be new iPhone, new Apple Watch, potentially new AirPods, and also MacBook Pro refreshes and MacBook Air refreshes. And there's no reports or leaks of this or anything, but I think it would be cool if they finally redesigned the iMac, which hasn't changed its design in like 7 years. If they could slim down on those bezels and bring it up to 2019 standards for displays, that would be really, really cool, but that's likely not going to happen. There's no evidence of that. However, if you were hoping for a top-of-the-line, top-tier redesigned MacBook Pro refresh, it sounds like there's gonna be one at the end of this year, and I know this is upsetting for those of you who just upgraded, but keep in mind this thing may end up being in its own department. It may end up starting well over $3,000, so if you just spent $2,500 or $2,800 on your new, just released MacBook Pro that you bought last month, don't feel like that's suddenly going to be outdated, because the new ones that come out, I don't think are going to be pushing the current MacBook Pro lineup out of the way. This is going to stand in its own department. The MacBook Pro Pro, for instance, or the MacBook Pro XDR. Apple likes to make things expensive, and I don't think this MacBook Pro is going to be any exception, and it might end up being way more expensive than what we're anticipating, but it'll definitely look really cool. And the one single feature I really care about in this MacBook, I don't even care that much about the speed. They can make it faster, sure. They can give it lots of storage, sure. They can make it really thin bezels on that display. That's really cool, and I want to check it out. But there's something more I care about than any of those things. That is, give it Face ID. Touch ID has never worked well for me. Using Touch ID on my MacBook Pro feels so dated now when I'm used to my iPad Pro with Face ID and my iPhone with Face ID. If they could give this thing Face ID and thin bezels, then personally, I would kind of get it if they had to start it at over $3 grand, because I'm sure they're gonna slap the most powerful CPU in there, and hopefully they'll be able to cool it down, even though this thing's probably going to be super thin. But still, updating those biometrics to be relevant in 2020 moving forward, that would seal the deal for me. That would make this MacBook Pro great. If it doesn't have it, well, I guess the bezels being thinner is cool. But anyway, what do you guys think of Apple refreshing the MacBook Pro or adding a brand new tier to the lineup at a far more expensive price point to kind of give us a sneak peek at the future of MacBook designs? I'm sure in 2020 or perhaps in 2021, Apple will bring this thinner bezel design down to the rest of the lineup into more affordable categories, but of course it's going to take a little bit of time. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this, so make sure you hit me up on Twitter or join our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.